So have you been thinking of that President Michael Jean idea we were tossing around earlier? Okay, perhaps that is a bit provocative, but the issue of who is Governor General, how that person is picked, and what powers they should have is what we want to tackle tonight. And guess who just might have opinions on all of that? Alan and Andrew are here in Toronto. Chantal joins us from Montreal. You know, we've just spent the last 10 days watching the next in line to be Canada's head of state tour the country, cause barely a ripple except for that moment when a rent-a-crowd threw some vegetables in Montreal. Republicans amongst us say that's proof positive that the system needs changing. Alan, what do you make of that?
Well, I don't think there's any question that most Canadians, English Canadians, go from kind of mildly positive to indifferent to the monarchy. I mean, our own research shows that as many people believe that this is a colonial anachronism as believe it's an important cultural institution or national institution. This particular tour, though, I think is not a particularly good reflection of the level of enthusiasm because, unfortunately, for poor Charles, I mean, if you ask which one of your favorite is your favorite royals, I mean, he's right at the bottom of the list at 4%, 1% higher than Philip. So I think if and when the Queen comes, I think you'll see a little bit of a different response. That said, it's an institution that is getting long in the tooth, says Canadians.
Should it be an institution that we're thinking about changing, Andrew?
I don't see why, just because, you know, Charles is not particularly popular. It doesn't seem to me to make that.
Not popular at all if you go on Paul.
I have no idea where that came from. Look, it's a valuable constitutional instrument. It has all kinds of virtues on that front. It has 5 centuries of history in this country, if you go back to include the French kings, going back to the settlement with, you know, Cartier and Champlain. It has I think there's a reason why you want to build upon previous institutions rather than simply chucking them out. So is Alan right that it has fallen into indifference among the public? Yes. So I think it remains a valid constitutional instrument. It's got a lot of work to do to try and rebuild itself as being a focus of loyalty and affection.
Chantal, what's your view on this?
I don't think you can rebuild it as an object of loyalty and affection. It never will be for Francophones in this country who go from mildly negative to indifferent. But B, past prime ministers, recent ones, have tried to name all kinds of interesting people from different walks of life to try to connect, in a way, the Governor General and hence the monarchy to new Canadians, to other generations of Canadians. And while people have liked, you know, what Adrienne Clarkson or Michael Jean have done, and they've been sources of inspiration to some communities, that has not translated into an increase of affection or interest in the monarchy. So it's not the figurehead or the notion of having one that is the issue. It's the notion of tying it to something that is arcane to most Canadians, French and English, who at this point I think have their identity rooted in North America and not in some European monarchical system.
Andrew?
Well, I agree with that up to a point. I think the problem is not the monarchy. The problem is that it's the absenteeism of it. The problem is that they're not living here amongst us. I think there's 2 things we can do in that. One is, I do think the Governor General's job is such that we should be trying to appoint people who have unrivaled admiration and respect in the country. And we have been trying to do it. Chantal gives it more positives, but I think we've been very gimmicky about it. If you look at other countries with appointed heads of states, Germany or Australia or Ireland, the people they pick for are people of absolutely, you know, almost revered figures, people who have great achievements to their name, great moral weight in the community. And that's important, as we saw, for example, very recently with the coalition crisis, when you're going to have moments when the Governor General has to make a really important call. Now, we got lucky there in that she and the Prime Minister happened to agree. But if we got another King Ming affair where they're disagreed, you need a counterweight. You need somebody who can command respect and loyalty in a time of crisis. And that's one of the very important constitutional safeguards that's built into the job of Governor General representing the Queen.
But that is like twice in 100 years, right?
80. But listen,
that's why you have fire extinguishers in your house, because once in a while you're going to need them.
Mm. And we probably should talk about at some point in time the powers of the Governor General. But by and large, I mean, the function is ceremonial and it's symbolic. And, you know, having someone who occupies the position that has a symbolic effect also has its purpose in terms of, you know, forging a stronger political culture. In the case of Michel Jean, I mean, here you have an individual who's, you know, female, immigrant, visible minority, refugee background. She's reflecting a segment of the population that we don't normally see in a lot of our public institutions, and that has, as I say, a unifying effect on the country, and that has some merit in its own right.
Well, I guess the question is, should it simply be a ceremonial and symbolic job. Chantal, if we're going to have a figure like this who acts as head of state, and some might argue should be head of state, should it be more than symbolic and ceremonial?
Well, it is at this point a bit more than symbolic and ceremonial, and I think that while I agree with the point about the parliamentary crisis and legitimacy, if the Prime Minister and the Governor General had been at loggerheads, in the end, the concept of having someone who could call time out on Parliament, or at least could be an arbiter, was important. So it's more than just symbolic. I think if it wasn't tied to the monarchy, having a figurehead like that, someone who is well respected, and I'm not sure we can agree on what that profile is, frankly, is something that most Canadians could relate to. But I think it's the extra link, having the prince's face on stamps and dollars that at some point has started to demean the institution.
But at what point do you go, sort of moving the constitutional monarchy idea aside and actually becoming a republic? I mean, what difference would it make in real terms if that in fact was the case?
Depending, first of all, what kind of republic you mean. If you mean a presidential republic like in the States, where the head of state is also the head of government, that has huge implications. The reason why we have that fire extinguisher role, the reason why the Governor General was able to play that role, is we have an overarching sovereignty that transcends the temporary majorities of whoever happens to be in power at that time. And in moments of crisis, when it's not clear who has power, it's vital that you have somebody who can represent the kind of enduring representation of the nation, the enduring popular sovereignty. So I think separating the head of state from the head of government is a very important function. It certainly would mean a very different system if you had a presidential system where they are united. You have a very different system of laws coming out of that. People talk about how difficult it is to change the monarchy because of that line in the Constitution about the amending formula, but it's much more difficult than that. All of our system of laws, our system of our legislatures, our courts, our executive power are all derived from the concept of the crown. And lawyers will tell you that has so many years and centuries of precedent and body of law surrounding that, you could not uproot that without uprooting a whole lot of other things. You would really change fundamentally the way the country's governed. I'm not saying it would be worse or better. I happen to prefer our system, but it would be a monumental change. There's very few former monarchies, now republics, in this world that did not get there by some kind of very abrupt rupture, either revolution or some other crisis.
Okay, well, let's back it up then a step and try to address what Andrew was suggesting, I think you're all suggesting, is looking for the right person for the Governor General's role. Should it, Alan, be taken away from the political appointments and some other system be created to come up with this person who should be Governor General?
Well, I think, again, the Governor General is the surrogate head of state on behalf of the monarchy. I don't think that's going to satisfy anyone who believes the institution isn't particularly functional. So who occupies that role, I don't think really makes that much difference. I mean, they serve in the Constitution at the pleasure of Her Majesty, which means that they can be dumped anytime they want. They can stay as long as they want. The convention is they're there for 5 years. But I think what Andrew is saying is very, very important, is that the system that we have is predicated on a number of interlocking blocks that run throughout. If you have an elected president, for example, a real head of state that is accountable to the people, which is what the Republicans want, then you would have to change the legislative bodies so that there would be greater legislative heft against and countering the balance of an executive power in an elected president. That, in turn, would diminish the role of the provinces and change our federalism. So it sounds to me like a very, very big price we would pay changing our entire system in order to get rid of something that is a harmless anachronism, which is our Governor General.
Well, if we can't reform our Constitution to elect our senators, we are not about to manage to reform our Constitution to do all that Alan and Andrew described. We've chosen that there is not going to be a consensus in this country that satisfies the amending formula to achieve all that. Moreover, I suspect that while most Canadians, or a majority, would like to get rid of the monarchy, for instance, if you ask people who are interested in constitutional change to list their priorities of what they would like to accomplish if we were able to do that, the monarchy would not come at the top of very many lists.
Well, it's not even a consensus, as I think Andrew started to alluding to. It is unanimity, and it is every legislator in every legislature in the country in order to make this particular change.
So let's get serious. We are a monarchy. monarchy. We're going to remain a monarchy. It has many virtues. We can either stumble along the way we are now with a kind of a monarchy that's kind of half-hearted, or we can try and find ways to invest it with more popular enthusiasm. So let me throw out a bit of an off-the-wall suggestion. If we're talking about how to revive it, I said before, the problem is not the monarchy, the problem is the absenteeism. There were suggestions 30, 40 years ago to bring over Prince Andrew, to start up a new wing of the dynasty. Now, people are going to blanch at that, but if we take seriously the idea that we are, in fact, a monarchy and are going to remain so, imagine if we had a Canadian king who lived here, who brought up his kids here. The kids spoke in Canadian accents. They spoke in both languages. They went to school here. They were a lived reality as part of the country.
Prince Andrew. Are you putting yourself forward?
Bring over Prince.
Room for two?
Bring over Prince Harry.
I think you're going to make me an active Republican with this suggestion, and I suspect you're going to make quite a number of Canadians who are benignly putting up with the monarchy Republicans if you start telling them that we are going to install in North America. I know you like fairy tales and princesses and all that, but this is...
There are some constitutional experts to say if you really want to deal with this, if you no longer want a kind of monarchy, it's very simple. All you do is you just appoint no one to be the next Governor General, and if the position will evaporate, you make no constitutional change at all.
Well, I like Andrew's idea simply for the idea of, having a little discussion and a debate on it. But let me just ask this quickly, because we're almost out of time. Michaëlle Jean, term comes up next September. Should she be extended?
My complaints with her appointment remain. I think she's done some good things as Governor General, but I would prefer to see somebody who has the kind of gravitas and moral standing that I talked about earlier.
Alan?
I think she's been a fantastic Governor General. I think she sends a really, really strong signal to, an entire wave of new Canadians that haven't felt that they were particularly well represented in our nation's institution, and who looks better in a military uniform than her.
But your answer is yes or no to
Just keep her around for as long as we can find someone better.
Chantal?
Why? Usually they're extended Governor Generals at the convenience of the Prime Minister. If the Prime Minister of the day is too busy with elections to appoint a new one, I'm not so sure that Stephen Harper would have any reason to extend her term unless he is terribly busy with an election.
All right. Good to end it at that. Good discussion.